going to give you my understanding about these so-called Federal Reserve notes. I've always called them a dollar, but they're actually Federal Reserve notes. If you look at the very top of a dollar bill, it doesn't say national currency. It doesn't say money. It says it's a Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve is the private corporation that acts as the bank for the U.S. government. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So I don't know if we're gonna. There's a serial number. I think you could track the dollars, see where they go, all over the place. And so originally they were called the greenbacks because they used green ink. The Confederate dollars didn't have anything on the back, just printing on one side and then just a blank piece of paper on the other side. So imagine, paper money being like that. The dollar isn't very fancy. We need a watermark. There's no watermarks on the dollars, more holographic images, more metameric inks. I don't know if cotton and linen fibers. So this is made up of cotton and linen fibers, I think 75, to 25%. So this is 75% cotton, 25% linen fibers, this greenback jack, this American candy corn, this universal cocoa popper. So what can we glean from this? This says in 1789 is when the Department of the Treasury was established. 1789 would be the first year of George Washington's presidency after the Revolution. Many years after the Revolutionary War was already over. This is the 2013 series, so I guess this is a 2013 bill, right? Meaning this is 7 years old. This piece of paper is at least 7 years old. It was printed up in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So B, the Bank of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, B. It's got the Treasurer of the United States signature, Rosa something, and then the Secretary of the Treasury. So the Treasurer of the U.S. and the Secretary of the Treasury, who is something or another. It's signatures I can't really read. And, of course, you got these weird-ass Freemason symbols, and it says $1 on it. It says the United States of America. This is the only dollar that, anybody recognizes. It's got the Great Seal, Novus Ordo Seclorum Annuit something, E Pluribus Unum, in God We Trust. So that's from that $1 bill. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. My Federal Reserve Bank, being a patron of Colorado, is in Kansas City. It's a Federal Reserve Bank number 10. So George Washington, this is also a series 2013. And it also at the very top says Federal Reserve Note. And then it also has, the series or the serial number and which of the Federal Reserve banks printed this dollar out. So in 1914, when Federal Reserve notes were printed up, the current Federal Reserve notes, this was the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing, was established in 1862. So they've been printing up money for quite some time, but the U.S. The Federal Reserve notes specifically are going to get printed up in 1914. So this American dollar that we know today, and these are actually big and fat, so it's a little bit different, but this is just over 100 years old. So they were used as currency by the 12 Federal Banks of America. They printed up all these federal notes in 1914, and then they were secured by a gold certificate of 25%, and the balance of 75% in gold certificates, commercial paper, or U.S. government obligations. And so that's what the Federal Reserve notes were, backed by 25% of a gold certificate and maybe 75% in gold certificates or commercial paper or U.S. government obligations. Commercial paper, just like Bitcoin, it ain't worth a continental. Bitcoin ain't worth a continental. So the U.S. Treasury prints up paper money, and the U.S. Mint coins the coins. So the coins are made by the U.S. Mint. The paper money is made by the U.S. Treasury. U.S. money used to have national currency written at the top of a picture of a $10 bill that I saw before. In 1914, they were backed by these gold certificates, commercial papers, U.S. government obligations, the greenback jacks. The $100 bills are called Benjamins. All about the Benjamins, all about the $100 bills. The Federal Reserve, they destroy 7,000 tons of worn-out dollar bills every year. The last time that the Federal Reserve printed something more than a $100 denomination, $100 bill, was in 1934, when it printed up $500, $1,000, $5,000, and $10,000 bills. So we've only been printing up to $100 since 1934. 2017 saw the printing up of $1, $2, $5, $10, $20, and $100 bills. The last time a $50 bill was printed up in America was in 2013, and those were pink. They're adding some pink ink to the $50 bills. Purple ink was added to the $5 bills. Orange ink was added to the $10 bills, and teal was added to the $100 bills, to the Benjamins. So they added on to the green ink, so they're still greenback jacks, but now they just got, a little sexier, a little more Rainbow Skittles gay sex flavoring, just a little addition, just a little cherry on top there. A commercial bank that maintains a reserve account with the Federal Reserve can obtain notes from the Federal Reserve Bank in its district whenever it goddamn pleases. Federal Reserve notes are printed up by the U.S. Treasury Department, a government department, not the Federal Reserve itself. If the notes are newly printed, then they also pay the BEP for the cost of printing, which is about 4 cents per note. And this is different for coins, which are purchased at their face value, for their face value. So Federal Reserve notes, U.S. dollar. It's the American dollar. Federal Reserve note is the American dollar. Let's just cut through the bullshit, at least as I understand it. And that's, most of the world understands it. So it's not a U.S. note, it's not a demand note, it's not a continental, it's not technically national currency. It's used as national currency, but it's a note by the private bank, the king of all banks, the Federal Reserve, the bank of the U.S. government, who the U.S. government has no control over. A private corporation owns the Federal Reserve. And so the American, U.S. greenback jack, it's actual legal tender. This is money. This is a medium of exchange. This is a store of value. And it's a unit of account. True blue, legit cash money. It's a greenback worth almost as much as a Hershey's bar. So $1, the almighty dollar. It's not what it used to be. You got homeless who used to ask you for one. Now the motherfuckers are asking you for 3. The almighty dollar, right? So it's not, dollar ain't what it used to be. But a dollar, just like any other dollar, the U.S. dollar, the Spanish dollar, I like that. It was actually made of real silver. We had silver dollars, right, with JFK's picture on them. Silver dollars, I think getting gold U.S. dollars, silver dollars, Bitcoin is some sort of digital currency. That's the only way digital currency is going to matter, is when it gets state government sponsorship. So the U.S. dollar's got 3 basic functions. It's got a medium, it's got a measure, it's got a standard, and it's got a store. A medium of exchange, a unit of account, a.k.a. a common measure of value, a store of value, and, that's all very self-explanatory. The U.S. dollar is actually the U.S. Federal Reserve note. The U.S. dollar is its nickname. It's got dollar written on the bottom, but it's a Federal Reserve note, which means it's debt. It's debt handed out by the central bank. And we all pretend that this piece of paper that represents debt. No, I guess it's more of an asset than a liability, isn't it? It depends. I mean, it depends on where you're at in American history. This was, you know, people say it's not worth a Continental. This was a Continental. This is what we, you know, we printed up American dollar bills, and they turned out to be worth jack shit. So they were Bitcoins, right? The Continentals were basically the Bitcoins for the colonial government. So 1914, this is going to be the 1914 series, 1917 series, 1934 series, 1930. So you're going to have just 1 year after the Federal Reserve is established, 1913, 16th Amendment's ratified in 1913, and then you get the Federal Reserve. Now you got Federal Reserve notes being printed in 1914. And this injects this $2.2 trillion, this spending bill, that's being injected into the system right now devalues the dollar. I mean, where are we going to get $2.2 trillion from? Well, the U.S. Treasury is going to print it on up, and then they're going to, you know, exchange it with each other, pretending like there's some sort of accountability. Meanwhile, they all make billions. They all make, you know, a shit ton of money. So we print up $2.2 trillion. That devalues the dollar. And we're putting all this money into the hands of the bankers to liquidate, to make sure they have plenty of credit, to make sure they can get all their books and get their shit together. How come we don't liquidate the accounts for the American people? We do it for the bigger banks. $2.2 trillion, they can turn that shit into $4.5 trillion somehow. So they got all these, you know, financial accounting magic tricks, you know, a bunch of accounting fraud. A Federal Reserve note is also a U.S. bank note. It's a U.S. bank note. It's printed up by Crane and Company of Dalton, Massachusetts. So it's just printed up by a corporation. Crane and Company, however, uses fancy cotton. They use very fancy cotton in their paper. Federal Reserve note products. Ben Franklin is on the $100 bill. Salmon P. Chase. Salmon is on the $10,000 bill. U.S. government, Congress, $2.2 trillion spending bill. $2.2 trillion. Now we have a $25 trillion debt. $500 billion is going to go to the Federal Reserve. They're going to go to the Federal Reserve, which they can use, I guess, to buy money that the U.S. Treasury prints up or something else, commercial paper. But don't, why would they invest in commercial paper or Bitcoin? I mean, Bitcoin is just a commercial paper of, you know, the Continental years. So that's not really even, you know, like the Continental. Bitcoin isn't worth the paper it's not printed on. And Bitcoin, not worth the Continental, right? It ain't worth a goddamn Continental. Federal Reserve notes, they're backed by the assets of the Federal Reserve banks, and these assets usually consist of Treasury securities. Treasury security. So the Bretton Woods system, this is a monetary system. Nixon is going to take us off the gold standard in 1971. So the U.S. dollar is not tied to gold or gold certificates or anything like that whatsoever. You might be able to use dollars to, you know, purchase gold, but it wouldn't be in the best interest for the person who's got gold to sell you their gold. But it destroyed the Bretton Woods system. So for the longest time, since 1944, you had the Bretton Woods financial system. And the pound sterling is also going to become a free-floating fiat currency at the same time that the dollar does. So you have UK, the pound sterling, just following the U.S. dollar's lead in 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. So the Bretton Woods system, just quickly, money management. This is a monetary system established by the United States and Canada and Western European countries, Australia, and Japan. After the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement, they're establishing the monetary system, the first fully negotiated world monetary system ever. In Japan, Japan was there. Not the surrendering, the empire? Crazy. Okay, so 44 nations, basically all the 44 allied nations were there, including Japan. I don't know, 730 delegates were there, gathered at Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. This is in July 1944. The Bretton Woods system is going to establish the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and then the U.S. had controlled two-thirds of the world's gold at the time. 1944, 1 year before the end of World War II. The chief features of the Bretton Woods system was, number one, all countries needed to adopt a monetary policy that maintained its external exchange rates within 1% by tying its currency to gold, and to allow the ability of the IMF to bridge temporary imbalances of payments. And also they acknowledged the need to prevent competitive devaluation. So Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. That takes the heart and soul of the Bretton Woods Agreement. Everybody was supposed to adopt a monetary policy that tied the external exchange rate to within 1% by tying it to gold. And Nixon takes us off the gold standard, so therefore the Bretton Woods Agreement is gone. And the U.S. dollar, the Federal Reserve note that we all call the U.S. dollar, is now a free-floating fiat currency. It's not backed by gold, not backed by silver, not backed by jack shit. The only reason it's got value is because me and you buy into the bullshit. A Federal Reserve Bank can retire notes that return from circulation, which entitles it to recover collateral that it had posted for an earlier issue. Collateral such as direct federal obligations. So apparently obligations is being used like money. Private bank obligations, federal government obligations, or assets that were purchased through open market operations. So the $1 bill stays in circulation for 6 years. The $20 bill stays in circulation for 8 years. The $50 bill stays in circulation for 9 years. $10 bill, 5 years. $5 bill, 6 years. Give me control of the nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws. Mayor Amschel Rothschild, the way to make money is to buy when blood is running in the streets. John D. Rockefeller. Milton Friedman said that the Fed contributed to the Great Depression by not lending money to the small banks during the bank runs of 1929. Milton Friedman said the Fed actually contributed and made the Great Depression worse. The Federal Reserve was there to prevent panics in Great Depression, but they made it worse in 1929. Ben Bernanke will actually give a tip of a cap to Milton Friedman, saying even though Milton Friedman is right, the Federal Reserve fucked America over during the Great Depression, because Milton Friedman pointed out how the Federal Reserve fucked over the United States of America and the American people during the Great Depression. That will never happen again. So Milton Friedman is correct in the criticism of the Fed of the Great Depression by Ben Bernanke, who is a chairman of the Federal Reserve, who printed up the money for the Wall Street, the first Wall Street bailout of this millennium in 2008, the TARP funds. And Milton Friedman, Milton Friedman is turning out to be, sort of the Kissinger for economics. Milton Friedman was actually anti-imperialist, so even though Chile 1973 are going to use Milton Friedman's economics and the Chicago boys, and they're going to shock the shit out of the economy. Milton Friedman himself was anti-imperialist, and Milton Friedman himself just wanted his ideas discussed. He said he might be considered a classical liberal, but he thought labeling is disabling. So give me control of the nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws. Mayor Amschel Rothschild. So who is this Jerome Powell? $500 billion just landed in Jerome Powell and Steve Mnuchin's fucking lap. So Jerome Powell and Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary and the Federal Reserve Chair, they got $500 billion as Play-Doh to do with as they please, to give it to the bigger banks, to devalue the dollar. So the dollar is going to be worth less because they're printing more money. So that's just basic supply and demand. You print up more money, that expands the money supply, therefore making each dollar not as special as it once was. You're also starting this quantitative easing habit. 3 times in 2008 they used quantitative easing. They might, use quantitative. They probably will use quantitative easing now. And, 3, 4, or 5 times. This is TARP on crack. This Wall Street bailout of 2020 is way worse and bigger, and it establishes, you fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And so 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, basically an institution. So these big-ass banks think they could keep on fucking up our, economics and financial systems and keep on getting bailed out when we should be like Iceland and we should be chucking all these, criminal-ass jailers in fucking jail. You fucked up the economy. You almost crashed the economy. Now you get it. Go to AIG. No, we don't need an AIG. We don't need a Bank of America. We don't need, we don't even need a Federal Reserve. We need a Bank of America, an actual government department called the Bank of America. But we don't need Morgan Stanley and, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. Just let Lehman Brothers, just let them all fucking die. Just let them all just sink and die. That's capitalism. Some sink, some swim. You didn't get your shit together, so now you're going to, you're going to sink. Warn everybody what's about to happen. This company is going to go bankrupt, so they're going to, offer all their assets up to their creditors, and it's going to be a complicated thing, but just, you could check the system to make sure it doesn't have a ripple effect. The capitalism, that's the whole idea of capitalism. If you're not letting these dinosaurs die, then you have this big toxic monster, this too big to fail monster that's going to get worse and worse and worse. It's quantitative easing infinity, and this is bad news. Thomas Massey, I hate to say it, Thomas Massey and Rand Paul are absolutely correct. You can't just keep printing money up. You got $25 trillion worth of debt already, and you're giving it to the big banks, so you're just, solidifying the biggest transfer of wealth. People say they don't believe in the redistribution of wealth. We just distributed wealth into the hands of the big banks and the corporations and PNC and Boeing and all these, big fucking tycoon, the elite, the 1%. The Jeffrey Epstein ruling class. All the people that's on Jeffrey Epstein's Rolodex. That's who's part of the 1% in the ruling class, and that's who's benefiting with the Wall Street bailout. And so, I don't know. Seems like we should listen to Milton Friedman. I think Milton Friedman offers some words of wisdom. Anyways, John Masters, 1:33, April 2nd, 2020, Thursday. Peace!